Story 1. On the Hunt. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, and a few years back, my boyfriend, who's deeply into hunting, often expressed his wish for a deer stand. As his birthday neared, I opted to look on Craigslist for a second-hand option because I was on a very tight budget. Quickly, I found what appeared to be an ideal present, a deer stand that had only been used a handful of times, being sold by someone claiming to be an older man ready to let it go, given his age and the lack of interest from his grandchildren. The seller listed an email address for inquiries, and through his replies, there emanated a kind of warmth you'd associate with an elderly gentleman. After some back and forth, we agreed on a price, and set a time for me to come and pick it up from his property. As I navigated to the address provided, the sight that greeted me was unsettling. A beat-up house, faded and peeled, surrounded by an overgrown yard that looked like it had been neglected for quite some time. Yet, there stood the old man, a warm smile across his face, seemingly harmless, welcoming me with a wave as I pulled in. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, he motioned towards the dense woods behind his house, explaining the deer stand was set up just off a trail, back in the woods. He explained that the stand would have to be dismantled first, no tools needed, and after which he'd assist me in carrying it back to my car. The idea of heading into the isolated woods with a stranger triggered a sense of unease in me, yet his mild manner and tales of his grandchildren portrayed him as a figure I could trust. As we ventured into the forest, he recounted tales from his time in the war, and reminisced about his favorite car from the 1970s. However, as we delved deeper, the trees grew denser, and the sunlight started to fade. The deeper we went, the more my discomfort grew, despite his efforts to engage me with stories that now felt like they were merely meant to soothe my growing apprehension. Eventually, we came to a fork in the path. "It's just a few feet down this way," he remarked. As he spoke, his eyes nonchalantly swept through the woods in a manner that unsettled me. It was as though he was checking to make sure we were alone. The unease I felt earlier was now a loud alarm bell ringing in my mind. After a moment of hesitation, I informed him that I had changed my mind and would be returning to my car. Initially, the old man let out a light chuckle, like he thought I was joking. As I stepped back, however, his mood shifted dramatically. The once congenial voice turned stern. "It's just right around the corner," he stated, his tone now serious and commanding. I shook my head, and as I turned to leave, he called out sharply, "Hey, where in the hell are you going?" With those words, I began to hurry down the path. As I did, I could hear him behind me, hurriedly coming after me. My fear escalated to sheer terror. What started as a hurried walk turned into a desperate run, and I ran to my car as fast as possible. Behind me, I could hear the old man yelling and cursing at me. In those frantic moments, there was no doubt in my mind that I had unwittingly walked into a trap, and it was imperative that I escape immediately. As soon as I reached my car, I leaped inside and drove off as fast as I could. Once I made it back to town, I immediately called my boyfriend and relayed the harrowing experience. He insisted I stay put and wait for him to arrive. He also urged me to call the police. Upon their arrival, along with my boyfriend, I led them back to the property. But by the time we got there, the old man had vanished. Over the next few hours, it became clear that the property did not belong to the old man. Further probing by the authorities revealed no trace of a deer stand anywhere. The Craigslist ad turned out to be a sham, and I was the one who fell for it. I learned a lot of tough lessons that day. In my eagerness to surprise my boyfriend with a thoughtful birthday gift, I inadvertently compromised my own safety. Ultimately, I'm grateful to have escaped unscathed, and in the future, I'm determined to never find myself in such a dangerous situation ever again. Story 2. Test Drive. At 29, it felt like the end of an era. The car I had since high school, the one that was with me through every late-night adventure in college, the countless road trips, and the countless memories, was finally showing its age. To me, it wasn't merely a vehicle. It embodied the essence of my younger years, filled with both carefree adventures and laughter-filled moments. But as the visits to the repair shop became more frequent and the bills started to pile up, reality hit me. It was time to let go. I needed something more reliable, something that wouldn't have me on a first-name basis with the local mechanic. Initially, I tried listing it in various places, hoping for a quick sale, but success was elusive. The sentimental value I had with it didn't translate into market value, it seemed. Eventually, I turned to Craigslist, a last-ditch effort to find my old friend a new home. At the time, I had no idea that this decision would thrust me into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Almost immediately, a potential buyer contacted me after I posted the ad, expressing interest in the car. His request to meet at a bank for the transaction seemed like a good sign, a gesture towards a safe and straightforward sale. Everything was going according to plan, or so I thought. As I steered my car into the bank's parking lot, I was greeted by a man who appeared to be in his mid-40s. His appearance was rugged, yet he managed to offer a smile. We exchanged handshakes and a few friendly words before he turned his attention to the car. With a keen eye, he circled it, meticulously examining both its interior and exterior, bombarding me with questions about its history and performance, pretty standard for a potential buyer. Eventually, he expressed his approval but insisted on a test drive to seal his decision. Again, there was nothing odd about that. It's a common step in the process. Agreeing, I handed him the keys and settled into the passenger seat. As we pulled away from the bank, his questions continued, and his hands firmly grasped the steering wheel, gauging the car's handling and responsiveness. As the drive progressed, it became increasingly evident that we were veering further away from the vicinity of the bank. Initially, this growing distance didn't alarm me overly. However, as time passed, the extent of our detour exceeded what one would consider normal for a test drive. Seeking to address the situation without inciting any tension, I finally decided to voice my concern. In a casual tone, I remarked, "Well, we're quite a ways away from the bank now. What do you say we head back and wrap everything up?" Despite the clarity of my suggestion, it seemed to go completely unheard. The man offered no response. He simply continued driving, his focus unbroken, as if my words had never reached him at all. The man, who had earlier seemed eager and friendly, now exuded an air of disinterest, if not something darker. It was a stark departure from the man I'd met in the bank parking lot, and it set off alarm bells in my head. Yet, trapped in the passenger seat of my own car, I felt my options dwindling. I tried once more to break the silence, starting with, "So do you think?" But before I could articulate my thoughts fully, he abruptly interrupted me. "Yeah, I got somebody else that wants to take a look at it," he stated plainly. His words blindsided me. Here we were, miles away from the bank, and this was the very first mention of another interested party. The sudden revelation, combined with our current distance from the initial meeting point, sent a wave of unease through me. Finally, we arrived at an abandoned strip mall. It was a stark departure from the bustling atmosphere of the bank where we'd started at. Instead of pulling into the more visible front parking lot, he steered the car around to the back. There, an old dirty truck was parked with two men standing beside it, seemingly waiting for us. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me, and my heart began pounding against my chest as a sense of dread washed over me. When he parked the car, he did so with deliberate precision, positioning it next to a light pole that was conveniently placed just outside the passenger door. It was as if he had calculated this move in advance, intending to trap me inside by blocking any chance of a direct escape. "Hang tight," the man said nonchalantly as he turned off the ignition, extracted the keys, and stepped out of the car. My heart sank as I watched him close the door behind him, trapping me inside. He walked over to the two men waiting by the truck, and I observed them engaging in a hushed conversation, their eyes periodically darting back to me, making it unmistakably clear that I was the subject of their discussion. Although their words were inaudible, the ominous glances and the secretive nature of their talk left me with a deep-seated feeling of dread. It was apparent they weren't deliberating over the car's purchase details. Instead, the situation hinted at something far more ominous unfolding, something that had nothing to do with a simple car sale. Frozen and petrified, I felt utterly trapped. In a desperate bid for some form of control or help, I instinctively reached for my phone. But as my hand moved, a sudden motion caught my eye in the rearview mirror. It wasn't just me who noticed. All three men outside turned their heads sharply, taken aback by the unexpected arrival. A police cruiser was pulling up, and the wave of relief that washed over me was indescribable. I had never before in my life been so grateful to see those flashing lights. As the cruiser came to a stop, the man who had driven us here hurried back to the driver's side door of my car. He was about to speak to me when a voice from the patrol car cut through the tension, inquiring about our unusual gathering behind the strip mall. Reacting instantly, the man outside claimed we were merely discussing the potential sale of the car to the other two men. The officer, unimpressed by the explanation, sternly pointed out the impropriety of conducting such business in this secluded spot. The authoritative tone of the cop suggested no room for debate, and it underscored how out of place this entire situation was. "No worries," the man said, his tone casual as if to brush off the entire incident. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the keys back to me, declaring, "I don't want it. I'll get a ride back with these guys," as though suddenly all interest in the car and whatever plan he might have had were abruptly discarded. Catching the keys, I quickly slid into the driver's seat, my heart still racing from the ordeal. As I made my exit, I noticed one of the cops giving me a stern look, while his partner continued engaging with the three men. My only thought was to distance myself from the situation as rapidly as possible. Without hesitating, I drove away as fast as I could, the urgency to escape that parking lot eclipsing everything else. The drive back was a blur, my mind replaying the events over and over. I couldn't shake off the sheer magnitude of what had almost transpired, and how narrowly I had escaped a potentially dangerous situation. The relief of being safe was overwhelming. Eventually, I decided to trade in the car at a dealership when it came time to purchase a new one. In hindsight, that's what I should have done from the beginning. The whole terrifying episode served as a grim lesson, one that I'll never forget. It marked the first and unequivocally the last time I ever used Craigslist to sell anything. The risk, the fear, and the potential for danger simply weren't worth it. Story 3. Lost Dog. I'm a 28-year-old woman who experienced something a few years back that was so terrifying, it's been haunting me ever since. It started on a heartbreaking day when I lost my beloved dog. He wasn't just a pet. He was my best friend, my family. When he disappeared, a piece of my heart went with him. I scoured the neighborhood, posted on every social media platform I could think of, and even hung flyers on every lamppost in town. But there was no sign of him anywhere. In my desperation, I turned to Craigslist, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone had seen him. A few hours after I posted the listing, I received a call. My heart leapt with hope. The person claimed they had seen my dog run into an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town and provided me with the address. There was something amiss about this. The location was well outside the area where I would have expected my dog to wander off to. It struck a chord of unease within me, yet despite the sinking feeling in my gut and the red flags waving in my mind, I clung to the slim chance of finding my dog. The desperation to be reunited with him overshadowed my better judgment, pushing me towards a decision I could have never imagined would lead me into such a dangerous situation. As I arrived at the warehouse, the scene before me did little to ease my growing apprehension. A rough-looking man stood by a partially open door, claiming he saw my dog run inside. Everything about the situation screamed danger, from the man's appearance to the desolate warehouse, but the possibility of finding my dog clouded my judgment. The man offered to accompany me inside, insisting on closing the door behind us to prevent my dog from escaping. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the thought of leaving without my dog was unbearable. So, I followed him into the dark, echoing vastness of the warehouse, calling out for my dog with a hope that quickly turned to dread. It didn't take long for me to realize my dog wasn't there. I called out for him, but all I got back was the echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls of the abandoned warehouse. As I turned to leave, my path was unexpectedly blocked by the man. "He's not here, so I need to leave," I told him, my voice steady despite the rising panic within me. "Well, hold on," the man responded, his tone deceptively casual. "Maybe he ran into the back corner." I shook my head. I don't think he came in here at all, I replied, trying to edge past him toward the freedom of the door. Well, what's your hurry? Maybe we can have some fun, he said, a disturbing glint in his eye that sent my heart into overdrive. In that moment, it became chillingly clear to me. I had walked straight into a trap. This man had never intended to help me find my dog. My thoughts raced as I realized I was in a dire situation, far from help and at the mercy of a man with dangerous intentions. The only thought that raced through my mind was to push him as hard as I could, to take him by complete surprise. It felt like it was too late to avoid a physical confrontation, and my instincts screamed at me to act. So, out of nowhere, with all the adrenaline coursing through my veins and the desperation of needing to escape, I lunged at the man and pushed him with all the force I could muster. It worked. He was taken completely by surprise, his eyes widening in shock just before he lost his balance and tumbled to the ground. In that critical instant, I didn't pause to look back. I bolted out the door, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I jumped into my car as quickly as possible, fumbling with the keys in a frantic rush to start it. As I sped away, I took a glance in the rearview mirror and saw the man emerging from the doorway. He was angry, his face contorted in rage, shouting after me. The fear of what might have happened had I not acted when I did haunted me, but relief washed over me with each mile I put between myself and the warehouse. The police investigated, but as expected, there was no one to be found at the warehouse. The phone number he'd used led them to a known homeless man, who revealed someone else had borrowed his phone that day. It was a dead end, and the man who lured me to the warehouse vanished without a trace. Miraculously, I was reunited with my dog the next day, found by a kind individual that had found him and seen one of my flyers. The relief of holding him again was indescribable. The experience left me caught torn between the dark realization of the malicious intentions that strangers can harbor and the contrasting light of genuine kindness that others extend. My dog is safe now, back in the warmth and security of our home, and for that, I'm endlessly grateful. Going forward, though, I've made a resolute decision. I'll never turn to Craigslist for anything ever again.